Folks, can I have your attention, please? On behalf of PMI and Ethane Group, just want to thank you all for coming today. If you're not familiar with Ethane Group, we are a talent solutions company headquartered here in Charlotte and offer recruitment and managed services under 3 core practice areas: information technology, healthcare IT, and creative. For those of you here who may be hiring anytime in the near future, or maybe are thinking about a career change at any point, or simply want to do some networking, we do have a table downstairs, and we are also going to be raffling off actually 2 separate coupons valued at $300 each for Kitty Hawk Scrum Master certification courses. Okay? And with that being said, I'd like to introduce you to Phil Caputo. Phil Caputo is a 6 Sigma Black Belt and PMP certified professional who works with organizations on program management, process optimization, and organizational effectiveness. He has a passion for creating problem solving and approaching challenges from multiple directions to develop impactful results. He has worked with several Fortune 500 companies in various industries on a host of large initiatives, providing technical, process, and people solutions, and Phil is local here to Charlotte. Put your hands together for Phil Caputo.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming on a Saturday morning, a rainy Saturday morning. How's everybody doing this morning? All right? Good. Okay, good. Solid. Good. Good. Good here. You know, I kind of wanted to open that way because I think it's an interesting question that I just asked you, and I really do think it speaks to what we're talking about. I asked you a question. How are you doing? I got some goods, pretty goods. I don't think I heard any awesomes or greats, but you know, it's Saturday, it's early. But basically, everybody answered that question. You answered it appropriately because you knew my intention of that question. I asked you a question, how you doing? You know what I was going for, which was just kind of a polite greeting. You know, I don't think anybody here thought I wanted to hear about the sick cat or if the mother-in-law's giving you a hard time or any of those things. You really just answered the question appropriately. I think that's the thing that I want to kind of get across today in our conversation. I want to talk a little bit about the process tools that are out there and really the questions they're asking from us. Because if you don't know what those tools are really asking you, you really can't give it the appropriate answer. Right? Make sense? My goal for today is to get everybody to, as you're working on that next project, producing that next deliverable, you see it for more than just, you know, a template or whatever it might be. Really, what are you trying to get to? What are you trying to solve for? Because I'll tell you, if you can jump to the next slide, please. Actually, the next one beyond that. All right. There are a ton of process methodologies out there. And I'll be honest, I mean, I made this slide look this way because they confuse me too. I've studied a bunch of them. I've worked with a bunch of them. I've used a bunch of the tools and techniques that are associated with them. And it's confusing. There's a lot in there. And you can follow different processes. You can follow DMAIC. You can follow PMI. You can follow all these different methodologies. But they're all really doing the same thing. They're trying to give you templates. They're trying to give you tools to ask the right questions. And hopefully, if you ask enough questions, you'll hit on the right ones. You hit the right ones. Hopefully, you stumble your way into the answer. That's kind of how these methodologies are designed. What I want to talk about today, though, is the opposite, right? Let me understand what I'm trying to get to so I can move all that other minutia aside and get to the stuff that's really interesting and impactful. So I look at this, and I kind of see, if you can jump to the next slide, that's what I see. It's just a mess. Actually, I love this part. Good luck. It kills me. You know, you really don't know where to move forward. You've got business partners. They don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. It says do this, I do this. I didn't get what I wanted. That is one of the issues or challenges that we run into when we're dealing with business partners that don't understand a lot about process methodology. Quite frankly, don't have the patience for it, don't really care. If you don't know how to get in there and make an effective statement and message and make some progress quickly and impactfully, you're going to get left behind. Next one, please. All right, so let's talk about what we're really doing. I showed you that slide a little while ago, and there were probably, I don't know, a dozen process methodologies on there. And like I said, they all use slightly different tools. They all have slightly different approaches. They have cool little catchy names here and there. But what are we really doing in process improvement? What are we really doing in methodology? If you jump to the next one, please. We're really solving for 3 or maybe 4 things, depending on how you look at it. Across the board, it's time, it's capacity and productivity, it's accuracy and precision, and eventually all those things lead to cost. I think one of the things that we tend to forget as project managers and process improvement professionals is that at the end of the day, we're in a business, we're part of a business, we're there to make money. We can't justify our activity and the work that we do. It's going to be a lot harder to get an operations partner to buy into the work you actually are doing. One thing I do want to point out, because I just love this picture.
Yeah.
You got this guy here waiting for the train, and you got probably 1,000 people on that train. Who knows what the inside of that train looks like? It's an interesting picture though, because it does speak to the type of work that we do. A lot of times you're walking through a process, and you got an operations partner explaining the business process, and that's what you see. A bunch of people just stacked up on a train hanging on. Probably doesn't smell great in there either. All right, let's jump to the next slide, please. So, what are we solving for? That's kind of our first question. The second question is, how do I know it's broken? How do I know that what I'm doing is broken, or how do I know that I want to improve it? I worked in several different environments before, and some of them are very process-driven and process-oriented, and they know what they're driving towards, and they know what they want to do. I worked in other environments where we've got multiple iterations of the same process, and you sit down with a few business partners, and you try to get them to spell out their process for you, and they're arguing on which is the right way to do it. So it's kind of all over the place, but or it can be all over the place depending on your organization, and you need to recognize that and understand that as you're asking your questions. But the best tools to really do that, first are key performance indicators. Hopefully everybody's familiar with those. These are very important to me, and the less mature the organization is, the more important they become. And the reason I say that is that it's very difficult to improve a process if you don't know what improvement is. A lot of what we get, in some cases, are based on operational knowledge or experience. I've been doing this for 20 or 30 years. I know how it works. I do it this way. I think I want to do it that way because I think it's a little bit cleaner. So we do it that way, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no real measurement of it. I don't have anything that I can measure against. So I do great, which is probably not right? It's probably not the best approach. I mean, they might have done great. They might not have done great, but we don't really know. So defining those are absolutely critical. So what they are, basically, if you're not familiar with a KPI, it's a performance metric. So it aids in evaluating how the business is doing. It's usually things like throughput or timing or timing in different steps or accuracy or different indicators that show you how healthy the business is being run. They should be based on what your company or department is trying to achieve. Right? We don't want a KPI on how many people make it to work on time if it really doesn't do anything for us. Right? And it does require that you as an organization define success. What's successful? I work at a lending firm. And right now, we really don't know how long it takes for a loan to go from origination to booking. We're really not sure. We have a general overview, but we don't know what pieces and parts are in the process. We don't know where we want to focus. It's one of the things that bothers me on a regular basis. So basically, KPIs are helpful in understanding how your business works, and they also help in measuring our performance or what data we collect. Does anybody know what that picture is? Has anybody seen that before? So that,
Reflection of a boat on water.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yes, it's a painting called La Battelle, and excuse my French, I don't speak French, but by Henri Matisse. And the story behind this painting is that it hung upside down for 46 days in the New York Museum of Modern Art. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is how it was hung. Nobody really knew. Nobody had any kind of indicator as to how it was hung, why it was hung upside down or whatever, until a stockbroker, a woman named Genevieve Habert, went to see the painting. They estimate something like 40,000 people saw the painting, including her own son, before she actually notified a guard, wrote a letter to the New York Times, and the New York Times notified the museum. So here's a great example. It's a classic example of, I didn't even know it was broken, because I'm not really doing anything to measure it. Interesting story, right? Jump to the next one, please. All right, so our third big question, our major question, well, how do I fix it? How do I fix it? What am I going to do? Well, there's 4 types of fixes, and we're going to get into each one of these in some pretty good detail. I will tell you that I'm a process guy. I'm not a tech guy, so I am going to focus on the process side of it. If you're looking for more technology, I'm sure there's another one of these tracks you can go to. But I'm going to focus mostly on the process fixes. We'll talk a little bit about people, tool, and environment. But really, if I were to guess where this group can make their impact, it's at the top one So we've got process fixes. Process fixes include normalization and optimization. We've got people fixes. Those could be organizational changes or cultural changes. We've got tool fixes, which could be automation to speed up the process. Watch how I said that, because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then environment fixes. And environment fixes are, a lot of times they're external factors that are outside of our control, but being aware of them, understanding where they are and what their impacts can be, is going to help us make better decisions. Next one, please. All right, and then lastly, did I get what I asked for? I will say that in general, in a lot of the environments where I've worked, we don't do a great job with, did I get what I asked for? We don't really go back and measure, was I successful? I set some goals up front. Did I actually achieve those goals? Or what did I achieve? And how do I know I'm measuring the right things? We don't do a great job there. How do you do that? Typically post-implementation measurement, KPIs, you go back and look at your charter, you do your ROI, and then of course there's always continuous improvement. So I'm a big believer in continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. Keep at it. You're gonna make incremental change. We're not gonna change the world and walk in and blow everything away and start all over again. It's gonna be perfect. The world doesn't work that way. So how do we make the right change at the right time? How do we prioritize those changes that we're making? All right. All right. So we figured out how we're solving things. What am I really looking for? Let's talk about some of the tools that are out there. Next one, please. All right, so I'm going to start with one of them, which is a really easy one. It's a project charter. This charter that we're talking about here is more of a Six Sigma kind of charter. It's less than a PMI type charter. I like it for a couple reasons. I like it because it's one page. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I have the attention span of a gnat. I can't. You hand me a 20-page document, I'm not going to read it. And I imagine that the executives that I work with and the executives you work with probably have the same attention span. The great thing about this one-page document is it says just about everything that we're talking about on one page, puts it right in front of you, and gives you an opportunity to really answer some hard questions. So let me throw a question out to the crowd. Why do we do a charter? And if I hear because it's required by Bank of America, why do we do a charter?
To try to write down what you took for the common goal.
Exactly. Yes, it's well, I'll give you a hint. The answer was right there. What am I really solving for? You know, a lot of times we'll do charters and we've read up these problem statements, and the problem statements really aren't measurable. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're trying to solve for. It just says, hey, we've got a problem. We need to put in a new imaging system because it's a good idea to put in the new imaging system. Because some executive made a decision to buy a new imaging system. And that might be the answer, right, in some cases, but where does the imaging system tie into the business and the work that they're actually doing? You know, I mean, if I'm writing a problem statement to put in an imaging system, the imaging system's a solution. I want to talk about the problem we're running into. Do I lose images? Can I not find them? Are they not indexed appropriately? What are the challenges that are associated with an imaging system and why it's not put in place? I love this in scope, out of scope. And this one is what's interesting about it is that it really helps you narrow the field. I don't imagine anybody here has ever dealt with scope creep, have you?
No.
Okay. Charters aren't going to make scope creep obsolete. It's not bulletproof, right? And at any given time, you guys know that you can be overridden by any executive that's out there. But you put it down on paper, you do your estimates based on paper. At least you have something to go back to when you say, hey, I'm going to be late. Yes, you said you wanted this. This is what you said you wanted before. We wrote it down, we planned and estimated based on that. Now you're telling me you want a little more. It's going to take me a little more time, or whatever that impact might be. But it's good to have it on paper and get people to at least understand it and agree to it. We've got assumptions and dependencies. So I think that in general, assumptions are exactly that. I really don't know what I don't know yet. I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to call out what I think is important to this project. I'm going to call out what I think is going to be a potential bottleneck or a challenge we're going to run into. I don't really know, but it's good to have those thoughts down on paper. Excuse me. This one is probably my favorite of the whole part of it, and I'll tell you why. I think that the concept of goals are a little bit challenging in a lot of our organizations, a lot of the structure that's out there, because I want to say something my goals should be very measurable. They should be numbers driven in most cases. I want to see a 10% reduction in cycle time, or I want to see a 20% increase in productivity per loan officer, or whatever it might be. it really does narrow down or focus on what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to solve for. And if you don't put the goals out there, you don't know what you're going to measure. If you don't measure, you don't know if you're going to be successful or not, or if you have been successful once you actually implement. So if I were to encourage anything on here, I would focus on problem statement and goals and objectives. I think those are the primary pieces of what this document delivers. Yes, sir?
Could you also say by when?
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Yeah, they need to be structured by time. Absolutely. I could say that I want to see 10% increase in 2025, which I don't know if any of us are going to be in our current roles by then, so actually, hopefully not. The last one I do want to point out, metrics. This is a particular challenge in a lot of places. Some places better than others. Like I said, depends on maturity. But metrics are a particular challenge, but it is helpful in how do I get to what I want to measure. We talked about time, we talked about productivity, we talked about whatever those goals might be. But that's where you'll write down how I'm going to measure those things. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is a living, breathing document. It can change as it goes. But it's good to at least get those thoughts out, get them from the project team, get them to start thinking in that direction. Project charter, any immediate questions? Make sense? All right, next one, please. Key performance indicators. We talked a little bit about these before. We're going to talk a little bit about them again. So we talked what they were. To be effective, let's talk about, they need to be well-defined and measurable. I have measurable bolded and italicized. Measurable, measurable, measurable. Too often, KPIs have to do with my perspective on. We're going to talk a little bit about critical thinking a little bit later and how to challenge perspectives. But too often it's we want to do a better job in, or we want to implement this. It's more of a kind of a statement of intention rather than an actual fact. So they absolutely need to be well-defined and measurable. They need to be clearly communicated. Everybody needs to know what those KPIs are. Everybody needs to know what they're being measured on. I'm a big believer in understanding the reason behind things. And typically when I either manage a project or manage a team, and the team's managing a project, and they get a new assignment, most of the time I'm asking, why is this important, or why do you think it's important? And if I don't know the answer, I'm going to go back to whatever executive is asking us to work towards it. But there should always be some reason why you're doing things. It creates that buy-in. It helps people understand what they're going after, but it also helps them make better decisions. If I know what the question that I'm trying to answer, it's a lot easier for me to answer it correctly. They should be crucial towards achieving the organization's goals. We talked again about measuring what time people get in the morning. Not much of a clock watcher, and I'm really not a morning person either. So would I do very well on that metric? Is that an indicator of my being effective at my job? And I'm sure there's plenty of other indicators that say I'm not, but that particular one would be a big one. And then be applicable to your organization. So they need to make sense. So we may talk about, I don't know, some random metric that might help race car drivers out, but it doesn't really help Springleaf Financial. Yes, ma'am.
My new manager, he loves to, when you talk about metrics, say, is it actionable?
Mm-hmm.
So I give you what am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
So we measure a lot of things, and so now when I look at it, I say, well, okay, that's interesting. What am I supposed to do? Is there something that I would read from this to say, okay, there's some action I can take now if I want to change that metric? But sometimes I think we just measure things to measure them. Like, oh, look, I made a pretty chart, and a pretty bunch of charts that I update every month, and nobody looks at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like your new manager. Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be actionable. There needs to be something. A lot of times I'll speak to the team when we're talking about whatever we're doing, and I'll say, so what? What does that mean? Why is that important? What does that do for me? Why should I buy in? Why should I jump on board? It's exactly that. If I can't see what the output is, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just being dense, but somebody needs to be able to explain that. We all need to buy in. We need to own and understand it. Absolutely. Actionable. Very key. So I put a little note down here, and I always find this one interesting. And I will tell you that this is a personal gap of mine. I don't typically think incentive plans. I'm an execution guy. I'm a process guy. I'm a project guy. I think that if I design a smart process, it does the right thing for the organization, does the right thing for the customer, people are going to jump on board. It makes sense. Your manager's telling you to do it. That's what the process says, do it. Although it doesn't always happen that way, does it? What I've seen most recently, and actually all along my career, is that what the incentive plan tells you to do is what you're going to do on the front line. That's what really drives the behavior. So, and I know a lot of us don't have influence on this directly, but I will say that if you do have KPIs or you get into a KPI conversation, definitely bring up the incentive plan. Because it's going to create some success for your process. It's going to create buy-in on the front lines. You know, we all, we're not there for friends or fun, we're there for money, right? All right, next slide, please. All right, and then data collection plan. So this is an interesting tool. I don't know how many people have ever actually used one of these before. But I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I
Um,
can do it, don't worry.
Okay, all right. So a data collection plan, the purpose behind the data collection plan is to put a little more organization and structure around the data you're looking to collect and what you're going to measure. So if you start over here, you've got the metric itself. So again, we're building on the tools that we're using, we're creating. You've got the metric over here, we've got the operational definition. Why is the operational definition important? Exactly. If I mention, actually we were just having this interesting conversation on the difference between migration and integration. This is something that's in my email box as we speak. And we're debating if migration is a subset of integration or integration is a subset of migration. So my point was, hey guys, I think we can get some definitions out there and understand what we're talking about. Data source. So I know where I'm going for the data. Is there a single source? Is there a system of record? Hopefully there's a system of record. Hopefully we can go for that system of record, go to that system of record and pull out the information that we're looking for. Sample size. So now we're starting to get a little bit nerdy Six Sigma. But we want to make sure that the amount of data that we pull is reasonable and makes sense and it gives us a good solid understanding of the data that's out there. It's not just a small subset. Who's responsible for doing it, when they're going to do it, how they're going to collect it, and then any other data that needs to be collected at the same time. This is just kind of your base framework. It gives you a good understanding of what I'm going to pull, how it relates to my KPIs, how it relates to my charter, what I'm trying to solve for. I just want to get a bunch of data and gather it together. So I am absolutely a data guy, and I know we talked a lot about methodologies in the beginning, and during my introduction, I am a Six Sigma black belt. I do find a lot of that methodology as smart and it's very rewarding, and I think it can be effective. I will tell you that I'm not, I don't know, a purist. I don't run Six Sigma projects every single time, and I think it just has a lot to do with the organization, their appetite for it, the time that's involved in it. But I like to use, I'm a little more agnostic, I like to use the tools that are out there. But if you're going to ask me to solve a problem or make a statement or stand up to an executive, it's going to be based on data, it's not going to be based on Phil thinks. Let's see. All right, and we talked about this, that it just needs to be useful, it needs to be reliable. We're going to talk about the MSA in a second. Next slide, please. All right, measurement systems analysis. Has anybody heard of this? Are you guys familiar with these? All right, so an MSA it can be a couple different things. Excuse me. MSA can be a couple different things. It can be a very complicated statistical measurement and test along with the data that you have that's out there. It's not really what we're talking about today. I'm going to talk about it at a very base level, a very kind of just generic level. And basically what an MSA is at the highest level, it's just a way to validate your data with some other source of data. So you go to your system of record and you pull all that data out there, and everyone just thinks it's reliable, right? I mean, it comes from the system of record, it's from a computer, it's reliable. Not too often do we actually go out and look for supporting data or data that is out there that I can say, yeah, this is the right stuff, or no, it's not the right stuff. I do strongly encourage you to try to figure out if there's a way that you can validate some data, even if it's at a higher level. We pull out of the system of record that we've got something like 4% of our population that's in default in some way or another. Can you validate that in any other way? Is there any other function that I can validate that? Is there other data sets that I can use to validate that? Even if it's within an order of magnitude, it gives you that opportunity to understand fully what you're actually seeing. So an MSA, like I said, on that basic level, it's a measurement of process, approach, and the actors. It's also a validation of the measuring device. So you got a tape measure here. And I'm sure people in the room are more familiar with tape measures than I am. But depending on what scale you're going on, you've either got millimeters or you've got, 1/16 of an inch. Is that as precise as you can get with that particular device? Yes. Is that as precise as you always need to be? Probably not. I've worked in manufacturing environments where you're down to micromillimeters. So make sure that the yardstick that you're using as your measurement is effective and appropriate. And then also it helps in calculating the expected measurement uncertainty of your devices or your systems. So it gives you an idea. Well, we're close. We think we're pretty close. Might not be right on, but at least we have, within an order of magnitude, we've got some degree of confidence within our scale. So interesting story about MSAs. It's not real. Actually, it's not really about MSAs, but I think it's kind of interesting. Have you guys ever heard of Archimedes? You know who that is? All right. Okay. So he was actually from Sicily, but Sicily was controlled by Greece at the time, but of Syracuse. But he was a mathematician, a physicist, and an inventor. The very famous story about Archimedes, about him and the crown. All right, I'll tell you. So the king had a crown made for him, and he gave the crown maker, I'm not sure what the title is, gave the crown maker a bunch of gold, said, go out and make me a crown and bring it on back. And the king decided, being a little, he's a king, he's crafty. He wanted to make sure that he was measuring the amount of gold that was in the crown. So he challenged Archimedes with this. Can you measure the amount of gold that's in this crown? Did he keep any for himself? Did he substitute silver? What did he do? So Archimedes is looking at this crown, and it's irregular shaped. You can't really do it mathematically. You really can't figure out how to do it. And then one day he's sitting in the bathtub, and he sees the water in the bathtub rise, and light bulb goes off, or candle, I guess in this case. Goes off, and he gets excited. He hops out of the bathtub. He starts screaming, "Eureka!" He's running down the street naked. Eureka! Which means I found it. He got it figured out. He got so excited by it. Probably made him popular with his neighbors too. But basically, what he identified was that items of different mass will displace water differently, and for the sake of his measurement, water is fairly fixed. How do you think it turned out for the crown maker there? You think he substituted any silver for gold? He did. He did. Yes, he did. It probably didn't work out well for him in the long run. Not really sure, but they don't talk about that. Next slide, please. All right, so we've got an idea of what we're doing. We know what's out there. How do we fix it? Again, all these different methodologies, all these different tools, there's a billion ways to approach problems. What are the questions that we're really asking? Next one, please. All right, so let's talk about process solutions. So I told you up front, I was going to spend a lot of time on process solutions. I promise not too much, it is Saturday. So there's two types of solutions we talked about. The first was normalization, and the second was process optimization. So let's talk about normalization first. When I say process normalization, what I mean by that is that we've got several different departments or organizations or groups that are performing the same function. And we've got some variability in that function. And I think if anybody here is a Six Sigma guy, they know that variability is the enemy when it comes to process improvement. If everybody's doing it differently, I can't tell you what's right, I can't tell you what's wrong. There's way too much ifs and what ifs and that kind of stuff. So it's important to have normal processes, or at least I think it's important. So how do you normalize processes? Well, you can use process mapping. You can identify your variability through those process maps. You can examine that and determine your best process based on what kind of numbers. Hopefully you have numbers. And then you implement your standard processes. So that's kind of the very simple 4-step. We're going to get a little deeper into it, but that's a very simple high level on why it's important. Process optimization is a little bit different. That's where you do have a single consistent process, or for the most part, a single consistent process. And you have certain metrics or measurements that you want to improve upon. So again, this is back to that original piece around throughput and cycle time and productivity and all those different things. This is where the fun stuff comes in. You use a lot of the similar tools. I'm going to focus a little more on root cause analysis for this one. But it also allows you to develop solutions and functionality and measure your improvement. That's really what we're going for in optimization. Make sense? All right, next slide, please. So process mapping, that's my favorite tool for any kind of process solution to begin with. And this process map happens to be a real process map from one of our friends in the audience here. So let's talk a little bit about what this thing is supposed to do real quick. Process maps in general are, and I think hopefully everybody knows that they're drawn to whatever problem you're trying to solve. So sometimes you're going to see a level of detail that's kind of at this space. You might, in another process map that's maybe focusing on documentation, this step might be blown out into 4, 5, 6, 7 different steps. But because we were looking at this overall end-to-end process, it's kind of given us that whole overall space. The goal of it is just to give everybody a solid foundation on what this process looks like. What do we mean? What are we talking about? What are the problems? How do things fit together? That's what this document's for. The guys will tell you I am a huge fan of call-outs. Love call-outs. I'll tell you why. It doesn't muddy the process with a bunch of different steps that may or may not be super impactful to the level of the map that you're working on, but it does give you the opportunity to pull some detail in there, especially when there's specific questions around that area. So in this particular case, we probably have some questions here, we probably have some questions here, probably have some questions here. That's why we did it that way. I'm also a big fan of standardization of process mapping. I've worked in environments where we would have specific teams whose job it was to map processes. And I will tell you that every single one of them looked like that. But whenever we got process maps from other places within the organization, it looked like stuff here, spaghetti maps and lines crossed and whatever. Which makes it difficult to read. People don't know what they're looking at. I always assume that process discipline, process mapping, project management disciplines, I assume that people either are uninterested or uneducated on them whenever I'm dealing with a business partner. Not in a condescending way, it's just I want to make sure I'm taking the time to explain what I'm talking about and why things are important. You create a lot of variability in your maps, and you're kind of as bad as everybody else, right? So some high-level guidelines for good process maps. I like to start and end with terminators. It really shows where the process is starting and where the process is ending. It really creates that clear-cut jumping off point. I like swim lanes, or functional bands as they call it. I like them. They're not necessary for every single one of them, but I think from a consistency perspective, if you can put it out there in that format, people get it, they see it, they recognize it. This one is a nitpicky. I like consistent box sizes. I don't like when they're all, I just don't, and there's no real, I would love to tell you that there's some fact behind that, that maybe it makes people read them better. It just drives me nuts. I like very few crossed lines. And if you look at this map, there aren't very many crossed lines at all. As a matter of fact, I don't think there are any. Good job, John. Each box is numbered. And you will hear me say this, and I will tell you it's a pain in the butt. But why do you think I have each box numbered? And I insist that each box is numbered every single time.
To title your business requirement.
Title your requirements, traceability is a great one. What's
Make sure
happening?
everybody's talking about the same thing.
Exactly. What's happening in that step around assess the enterprise TSA? What's happening in that? Which step? Well, this one. Box 20. It's just a silly little easy way to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then I already talked about the call-outs, but I just love call-outs. Typically, if I have a question, an open question or an issue, or something that's associated with it that's drawing attention, I'll mark it red and just put it right on there. Hey, here's something we need to talk about. This particular map was done in Visio. There are other tools. Tool doesn't really matter to me, but what's really important to me is that create that consistency, give everybody that. My guys will tell you the McDonald's experience. You go to McDonald's in New Jersey, or you go in Texas, or you go in California, and it's a Big Mac. It's a Big Mac. And that's the approach that I like my team to take. I would like every experience with my team to be consistent, to produce the right deliverables, same deliverables, the same formats. You know what you're getting when you hire my team. You know what you're getting. All right, let's jump to the next one, please. All right, FMEA. Anybody here who's ever worked at Bank of America, you know this thing. You've seen this thing. You hate this thing. I will say that, in my humble opinion, I don't know that it's used appropriately every single time. So let's talk about the tool itself, and let's talk about what the tool is asking first. The FMEA, I know a lot of people, they see it, they're like, oh, FMEA, I know how to facilitate one of these, there's some magic behind it. There's no magic behind it. It's a template, guys. It's a template that helps you write down your thoughts. The purpose of the FMEA, if anybody's not familiar with it, is to just basically identify where things could possibly break. So here's my tip for you about why I think they're not necessarily facilitated correctly. They work best with a process map. So you do your map first, previous slide, you do your map. Your FMEA is going to be a lot more effective because you can go step by step and we start brainstorming how things break. And then you start writing down where they all break. And then you can talk about potential causes. And I said we were going to talk about root cause in a minute. And then we score them by severity, occurrence, and detection and get a risk priority number. So those three multiply against each other. So the FMEA does two things for us, right? It helps us identify where things could break. It helps us identify risk. It's also a scoping tool. I don't know if anybody's thought about it that way, but I'm going to come up with 100 ways things could break, and some of those will have a pretty high RPM. Some of those might not. So I might take the top 20, and everything else I'll worry about that later, or I'll accept that risk, or I'll solve it with a future project. So it really does help you identify not only risk, but also what we're going to actively solve for within our project, what belongs in our scope. You go back to the charter, you might need to add a few things in there. After you do this work, you come back here and you enter your countermeasures, and then you remeasure, and did I solve my problem, or do I think I solved my problem? So let's talk about this real quick, because I'm presenting this as fact, and I think that's one of the challenges that I run into with FMEAs, is that everyone presents them as fact. They're fact. This is how you do it, this is how you solve a problem, these are your risks. This template, like any other template that's out there, is garbage in, garbage out. It's only as good as the information that we put in there and what we agree to. We get a bad case of groupthink, we get a couple ideas in there that we think are problems, that maybe aren't necessarily problems. You're going to put a bunch of work in solving a process, putting a new methodology in place, and you're not going to get the results you were looking for. So again, careful on what you're asking for. Make sure that what goes in there is not garbage, like anything else. Actually, real quickly on the FMEA. Anybody know where the FMEA was developed? Give you a hint. It wasn't Bank of America.
GE or something?
It was actually in the military, late 50s in the military. It was developed by what they called reliability engineers in the military. And it was to identify potential breakdowns in military efforts or initiatives. There's three types. There's a functional FMEA, there's a design FMEA, and then there's a process FMEA. Yeah, so a little history there. Next one, please. Root cause analysis. All right, so here we've got our maps, we've got our FMEA, we think we know what's going on. Let's talk about root cause. Root cause is one of those items that I think is consistently tossed around as we know what we're doing here, and this is the root cause, and this is what the problem is. I don't know that we necessarily do a great job in actually effectively getting to the root cause firstly, but then secondly, accommodating the root cause. So, so let's talk about our operational definition. It seeks to identify the specific cause that, if corrected, would prevent an additional recurrence of the issue. That's really root cause. If I stop this, I will most likely not see this again. There's typically more than one root cause to any problem. There's usually not just one, there's usually more than one. So we're going to talk about a few ways to do it. But the goal here is determine what happened. I'm sorry, does somebody speak out? Determine what happened, determine why it happened, and then figure out what to do to reduce the likelihood that it'll happen again. Root cause analysis assumes that systems and events are interrelated as well. So keep that in mind. We think that the things that are happening all come to a single point. Next slide, please. All right, types of causes. So I like the little phrase up top, all causes are not created equal. This is something that if I were to take away, if I were you, I would take this one away, because I think this is a good conversation point to help people understand what root cause really is. There's different types of causes. A cause is a condition or event that results in an effect. Pretty straightforward, right? But there's a direct cause, a cause that directly results in the occurrence. There's a contributing cause, which is a cause that contributed to the occurrence, but by itself would not have caused the occurrence. And then you've got root cause. So that is, if corrected, would prevent the occurrence. Right? Make sense? Some of the sources, you've got people. A person did something wrong. All right, there's process causes. So it's a system, a policy that people are using to make decisions for their work. And then we've got tools or physical causes. So we've got a break in the technology. We've got a break in how we use the different tools to do whatever work that we're supposed to do. And in RCA, we should look at all three of those. All right, next one, please. All right, here's the key elements of root cause. So if you're going to embark on a root cause adventure, this is how you do it. You got an incident, or whatever the problem is, or whatever you're looking to solve for. Define the problem. What's happening? What are the symptoms? This is very similar to the same thought process that we've been talking about all day. Let me really understand what's going on. Let's make sure I really have the facts. Identify the potential causes from the various sources. Is it people? Is it process? Is it tools? You can do it 100 different ways. I'm comfortable with the people, process, tools approach. Drill into each cause and determine the cause of the cause. Identify which cause would prevent the occurrence, and then classify the impact of the root cause and bring brainstorm potential solutions. It's the same mindset, the same process, the same methodology. And that's one of the things that I do, I hope you're doing as we're having this discussion, is that you're drawing these similarities between methodologies and approaches and all those other things. Next one, please. All right, so determining root cause. So let's talk about some of the basic thought process. So if you'd seen me speak last year, I talk a lot about critical thinking. I just love the concept of critical thinking. I find it intriguing. I also think that it's something that we probably don't do well in most of our organizations and probably in general as a society. And the reason I think that is that I think it's very difficult to teach. And I also think that, interestingly, I think it's kind of something that we're almost born with. And we kind of it kind of gets rooted out of us during education because we're told to memorize this is the right answer. But I don't know. I wish I knew the answer because I have tried to teach it more than once and with varying success. But we have two types of thought processes. First is your basic reasoning. And that's kind of just your inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is kind of your bottoms-up type reasoning. So that's it's almost like your statistical measurement. If I know that 80% of the cars on the road are within 5 model years, I can assume that your car is probably within 5 years of that model or 5 years new, just because it's a basic assumption. From my experience, I understand that. Are all cars on the road brand new or within 5 years? No. But are most of them? Yes. So can I assume that? Yes. That's inductive. Deductive reasoning is more the top-down kind of logic. That's more that Sherlock Holmes type logic. So if A is B and B is C, then, or if A is true and B is true, C must be true. So that's one of those, I don't have a lot of time. I can tell you a funny story about that one, but I don't have a lot of time left. Real quickly, I'll run through it quickly because I do love the story. Has anybody seen A Few Good Men? Okay. So you see the end of the movie where Tom Cruise has got Jack Nicholson on the stand and he's just pounding him. And he says, so why'd you want to get rid of him? Oh, well, he was on a flight, he was a subpar Marine, and I didn't want anybody to take anything into their own hands. And then Tom Cruise said, well, you said you gave an order that he wasn't going to be touched, but then you said you shipped him off the base for his safety. If your orders are always followed, and you gave an order, why was the transfer necessary? It's basically top-down logic. This is always true, so that is always true. It's good seeing it. If you haven't seen the movie, rent it. I'm sorry I ruined it for you. All right, so what are the tools that are out there? 5 whys, appreciation, drill down, cause and effect. And I'm going to jump to these. We'll get into them each one as we go to the next slide. So next slide, please. Sorry, I'm trying to rush. If I'm going too fast, just stick your hand up.
Just let you know, 12:20.
I've got till 12:20?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I've got a little more time. I want to save a few minutes for questions. Okay. All right, I'll slow down a little bit. All right, so 5 whys. I love 5 whys. It's very simple and it's genius in its simple elegance, right? And it also reminds me of my kids. It's just a very simple process of asking questions until you get to what we think is the root cause of the problem. So I will tell you one other thing though before we get started into the actual whys. There is a point of going too far because I can ask why forever, right? I can go on and on and on and on. So I'll give you a little tip that has worked for me. I keep going with the why until I start getting away from fact and get closer to perspective, and I'll explain that in a second. So we've got a dead battery. So why is the battery dead? Well, the alternator isn't functioning. Well, why isn't the alternator functioning? The belt's broken. Why? Well, the belt was well beyond its useful service life and not replaced. Why? The vehicle was not maintained according to a recommended service schedule. If I were to say why again, where would I get? I'd probably say, well, Phil doesn't believe that he needs to service the car every 30,000 miles because he knows more than the engineers at Ford. Or
Phil can afford to get it done every 30.
or Phil, right. So, but we're starting to get into the subjective area here. These things, all these things here, are pretty well rooted in fact. And I think that's where you cut it off. I mean, 5 is typically the right number, but you can go to 7, you can go to 4. But from your perspective, as you're asking these questions, you start to get into subjective. That's what I put the brakes on. And don't stop until you get to a preventable reason for the issue taking place. I can't prevent Phil's perspective on automobile maintenance, right? Next slide, please. Appreciation. So appreciation is very similar to the 5 whys. And this one's not really used all that much. You don't hear about this one too often, but I do love it. This is, we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, the so what. But that's exactly what this is. You keep asking so what. You're really looking for the implications of and do they make sense. So appreciation is a technique used by military planners. So we'll use a military example. The fact was that it rained heavily last night, ironically. So what? Ground will be wet. So what? It'll turn to mud quickly. So what? If we've got a lot of troops and vehicles passing over the same ground, it's going to turn to mud quickly. So what? And then it's going to make it muddier and more difficult to pass. So what? Stick to paved roads, maybe change our approach, do whatever we need to do to make sure that we're getting people to where we need to get them to on time. So it's really just like much of what we've been talking about. Asking a question, what are the implications, why is it important? It's a good little tool, I like it. Next slide, please. Drill down. So here's another root cause tool. I do want to reiterate, because I talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but I want to say it one more time. Just like anything else, garbage in, garbage out, right? If I do the so what and I come up with, oh, well, we're probably going to have to buy new tires for everything. Probably not the right answer, right? It's probably not a reasonable answer. It's probably not something that's implementable in a short period of time. So remember, garbage in, garbage out. Let's look at these things critically. Let's make sure we really understand what we're talking about and the recommendations that we're making. Drill down. So basically, this one is exactly what it looks like. You write a problem on the left-hand side, and then you start building it out into different trees or different little arms or branches until you get to a point where you've got a pretty good understanding of what the problem is, and you've got some kind of actionable approach to solve for it. So this particular example is about how to improve water quality for water sports. So it came from I don't know where it came from. But you've got ships dumping oil and refuse. Why are they doing that? Well, it's cheaper to dispose out there. Is there some kind of publicity that we can do on some of those ships and why they're dumping that oil? Or is there some kind of legislation? Or can we monitor this? I mean, it's really just saying, all right, we've got a problem. Here's why it happens. Let's break it down further and further. I'll use the PMI test, decompose it further and further until we've got a really good idea of what's actually happening and what we can do about it. Just another technique to put some thoughts on paper. Next slide, please. Cause and effect diagram. I bet everybody knows what this one is. I do like the cause and effect diagram. I do. I think it's a good model. Has anybody ever heard of the fishbone? We call it the fishbone diagram, or actually, does anybody know the other name that was named after the person who invented it?
Yeah.
All right. Great. Most people don't know what that is, so I'm impressed. Everybody gets a gold star. Basically, you start with the problem here. I'm not going to go into this one too deeply. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it presented as the 4 M's before, but it's man, method, materials, machinery. It's the same thing. It's people, process, tools. It's another way to look at it, an environment. But yeah, great tool. A lot of fun to do in a whiteboarding session. Any questions on this one? It seems like you guys know this one. All right, let's jump to the next one, please. All right, and then validation. So let's talk about validation. I think this is something else that doesn't happen often enough. So, I will admit that, and you guys know me, I'm guilty of this myself. A lot of times I'll go through a thought process and I'll spend my time doing all these things up front and I'll really drill into this stuff. And I feel like I've thought about it so much and I know it so well that there's no way I can be wrong. Believe it or not, I think it did happen once back in like 1990. Always validate where you are. Make recommendations. I tell the team that there is 100 ways to be right sometimes. And doing what we do, we're consultants. We support the operation. We don't get to make the call, right or wrong. So the biggest or the most important piece is keep throwing ideas out there. Leave your ego at home. Here's what I think the problem is. Help me validate it. Help me understand it. It's your job, or the best way to really kind of think about your job is, my job is to consult. I don't own the process. It's not my decision. It's not mine to own. And I'll give you an example I gave the team a while ago. My team is fairly new. Process re-engineering and change management is fairly new to the organization where I work today, Spring League. It's a little bit of an old school kind of place. It was very focused on operations. It's a very strong branch network. They just recently started implementing a centralized network in there to support the branch operation. So the whole idea of change management and project management, process re-engineering, it's all entirely brand new. There's not a lot of short-timers there, and what I mean by that is that you walk around the headquarters in Evansville, Indiana, and you ask somebody how long they've been there, and they say, oh, no, I've only been here a little while, I've only been here 10 years. Wow, I've never spent 10 years at a job in my life, but good for you. So, as you can imagine, there's not a huge influx of new ideas that are out there. It's a little bit different in the way that ideas come across. We've always done it this way, and we've grown up this way. My team had a project out there to document procedures for one of the operational groups. They were having some challenges with how they were operating, their metrics were poor. And so we went out there and we did all our work, and we came back and we presented them, on this great procedures template. It was beautiful, and it was well planned out and great, right? We were so happy with that. And they looked at us and they said, what's that? Well, it's your procedures. And I said, well, where's the screenshots? Where's the Maggie does this and Sally does that? And I said, well, no, that's not really how our procedure works. But because we were new to the organization and because we were a brand new group trying to establish ourselves, we got a lot of negative feedback. Negative feedback went up to the executives, and then they're looking at me going, Phil, what are you doing? So, and the team was clearly frustrated, and I was clearly frustrated. And we sat down, and I said, so hey guys, here's how I'm thinking of it. Let's. Have you ever been to a restaurant? Let's say you're a waiter at a restaurant. Has anybody ever waited tables? And they said, yeah, sure. I said, so imagine that somebody comes to the table and they sit down, and you go to take, hi, can I take your order? And the customer says to you, I want the best steak you have, and I want you to microwave it. And you look at them and you go, you're asking for two different things. Our business partners were asking for two different things at that point in time. So what we did was, and my advice to John and Jess was, we're going to microwave the heck out of that steak. So we developed their process documentation in a format that they were comfortable with and from a perspective that they understood, and we got them to relax a little bit. And then we came back and said, okay, let's jump in here, let's understand really what's happening, and let's start picking this process apart. And it was only until then, it was only until we got that buy-in, it was only until we gave the customer what they were looking for, that they loosened up and let us influence what they were actually doing. It's this concept of give the customer what they want, not come in there with an ego, and solve the problem you're being asked to solve. It was a fun time. All right, so validation. I didn't even talk about this slide. I'm sorry. So validation, how do you validate? Or why should we talked about why you should validate, but how? Talk to the operations folks. So we've had a conversation. We put it on paper. They looked at our process map. They looked at our FMEA. They get it. They get all those other things. Here's where I think the answer lies to your problem. Here's where I think you need to do. What do you think? Ultimately, they own it. Ultimately, it's their job to make a decision on whether they want to implement it or not. Check with technology. I will tell you that technology shops, depending on whether they're waterfall or agile, depending on their maturity, depending on how rushed they are to produce, there's varying degrees of documentation that's out there. Sometimes you can go to a repository someplace and pull up BRDs and design documents and, great, I got it. I need to ask some questions, but I pretty much got it. Other times, you make a phone call looking for documentation and they go, what are you looking for? It's all over the board. If you've got it, look at it, review it. If you don't have it, if you can't find it, talk to people. Process reengineering. So this is a shameless plug. Come talk to whoever does process reengineering. Compliance. So most organizations have a compliance group that go down there, and their job is to review the operation and how they work, and are they in compliance with the standards. They're a great source of information. I don't know if you guys typically call on them, but I've always made a habit of getting with compliance and understanding what they do. I'm a thorn in their side, but it's a good group to get to know. Confirm with training. So training is the people that are actually putting this documentation on paper and presenting it to the frontline folks. If you've got ideas or questions or problems, it's good to get that training perspective. And then review your policies and procedures. I will caution, be careful, those things aren't always up to date. So if you see something that doesn't look like it aligns, ask questions. There is nothing like picking up the phone and calling somebody and asking a question. I know that we live in a world of email and instant message and texting and everything else in the whole world. Definitely a side note, but I encourage using the right communication method for the problem. So again, think a little bit about it. I'm going to make one little note down here, and I know I'm going to hear some groans when I say this. Training is never your primary process improvement solution. And what do I mean by that? So my Six Sigma instructor would drill that into our heads. It was training is not a big process solution. It's not your answer. It's not training. If something is broken in your process and your answer is training, start all over again because you didn't do a great job of understanding how the process works. The point behind that is that a good process can pretty much stand up on itself, right? An appropriate process, appropriate documentation, you should be able to go in there with your procedures and off the street basically struggle through what that process should look like. There shouldn't be too much that's left to question. And too often, at least in the financial industry, I see a lot of what I call baseball statistics. So we've got the folks on the front line, they've got all this change coming at them, and then they need to take a look at these accounts, they need to check 15 different things, and then depending on where this thing is, am I in a dome stadium on the West Coast during the hours of 8 to whatever, and I'm wearing the dark uniforms, then okay, I'm going to get a 320 batting average. It's a lot of change. There's a lot to it. So as process design professionals and folks that work with training and everything else in the whole world, our responsibility is to try to keep the burden off of those folks and try to create a bulletproof process. I'll give you the counterpoint to that argument too. I said in the very beginning, when we talked about scope and how we're going to implement things, sometimes we make choices that we're going to do things later. Sometimes we know that we're not going to fix the whole world all at once. And sometimes the only answer you have is, we're just going to have to train to that. I'm not a fan of that answer, but it is a common answer. It does happen. All right. Next one, please. All right. Actionable reporting and documentation. Somebody said actionable. Who said that? Yes, there you go. Actionable reporting and documentation. So the reason that this is top of mind is I did some work with our complaints group. And our complaints group was documenting the different complaints that were out there. They were trying to do a root cause on it. Some of them were pretty simple. A customer complained because they just didn't like the loan decision. And that's going to happen. If you're within loan standards, people aren't going to be happy. It happens. But in the other cases, in the cases where there are genuine issues, where maybe we did something wrong, or maybe we didn't follow policy, or maybe we did follow policy, but that policy probably doesn't make sense necessarily for our customers and how we approach problems. That's the kind of stuff that we need to be really smart about. We need to make sure that as we report those problems or those issues, they're actionable, we can do something about them. It doesn't just say, yeah, hey, so policy 123 said that this is what we do, so this is what we do. It's got to be a little more specific about the policy. What's the challenge in the policy? Does it make sense to challenge that assumption, think outside that box? So when you're documenting root cause, document the problem, use specific examples, document the chain of causes, identify the root cause, explain the rationale, categorize into actionable categories. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is just an example of a Pareto chart, which I think everybody's seen, and I'm going to skip this one because it basically says the same thing. Real quickly, it talks a little bit about scope. I think everybody's familiar with the Pareto chart, the whole 80-20 rule. What it basically says is if you solve, well, 20% of your problems, or 80% of your problems are caused by 20% of your issues. But basically what this thing is looking at is at the 80% line, these are all the problems I should solve for. Again, it's a little bit of a scoping and priority tool. Questions on that? Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Next slide, please. All right, so we're out of the process solutions. I want to talk a little bit about the people and the environment and the technology. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, only because as project managers and process design people, we don't have a ton of influence on a lot of these things. We can do what we can, but it's more about recognizing them and understanding them. It's less about actually making direct change to them. So, so let's talk about people fixes. People changes, people fixes. There's two types of real people fixes. First is cultural change, which is really shifting paradigms within an organization to make things, to make it think and work differently. And then there's organizational change itself. To me, organizational change is really more about aligning the work with the most appropriate resources. So that can be part of a process solution, right? You've got 3 departments that have handoffs within those departments. I see a bottleneck in department 2. How do I spread that work out a little bit? How do I make it a little bit smoother? How do I make sure that we've got the right folks doing the right jobs? That's probably the more important one. Has anybody ever seen this quote before? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That is from Peter Drucker. So if you know who Peter Drucker was, he was management consultant. He was a writer, he was a teacher. But this was his big quote. And what that really basically means is that the culture of an organization, regardless of how smart or well thought out your strategy is, you can't just come in and jump in and say, hey, I'm Phil and this is how we're going to do things. I've got it all figured out and you guys need some education. The world doesn't work that way. It's always gentle, steady pressure. It's leading with a deliverable. It's just like that story that I told you guys a while ago about the procedures. I could have jumped in there, or actually I did, said, hey, this is what your procedures should look like. And they said, this is not what we want. So what I did was, well, let me give you what we want, but I'm going to nudge you. And I'm going to nudge you, and I continue to nudge. I continue to nudge with different deliverables that we're producing, whether it's BRDs or test scripts or use cases or any of those things. Those things, up until my team came on board, completely alien to the organization. And I'm proud to say that we're doing a much better job now in understanding what those deliverables are. Peter Drucker's contribution. He is one of the guys that is credited with the structure of the modern corporation as it is today. He had one of his major concepts was front of house and back of house. It's kind of the framework for outsourcing. So his thought or his mindset was that organizations should focus on nothing but front of house type operations, and everything that is back of house should be outsourced to another organization where that's their front of house type of business. So interesting philosophy. I think that I think we're getting there as an organization. I'm not sure if I'm 100% bought in, but I think corporate America is pretty close to that mindset at least. Next slide, please. So culture changes. I'm going to start with a quote on top. There's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. I think it's a great quote. I don't think we see it too much. I think everybody probably recognizes the guy who said that one. Machiavelli, that is the end justifies the means. That is actually the article where that whole mindset and his political philosophy first came out. And it's probably his most famous work. But doing what we do as project managers, what's our job? I mean, there's functions to our job. There's communication and there's documentation and there's all this other stuff. But our job is to lead change. And leading change, as you guys know as well as I do, very, very, very difficult. So how do you change corporate culture? Again, that's something that's out of our hands a little bit, right? But if we're looking at changing corporate culture, if we're looking to push them towards a more documentation-based methodology for designing whatever they design, whether it's technology or process or whatever, well, let's assess the current state. What's our culture? What do we want it to be? Let's create a clear vision. Where are we going and why is it important? Create an action, a plan of action. How do we get there and how do we need to think differently? Those are the big pieces. Why does it fail? Has anybody here ever tried to push a culture change? Why do they fail? The answer's in the bottom. It's a lot of times there's a lot of big picture, but no real direction in getting to the big picture. This first one is interesting. It reminds me of the Hoshin plans that used to happen at B of A. We'd have this big picture statement that says we want to be the most admired company in the world. To look at that, you're like, okay. But I think the nice thing about how they implemented that was that each one of those, the directs to the CEO had their own portion of that Hoshin plan, and it filtered all the way down to the individual, like me down there, that I'm gonna do whatever I can to make us the most admired company in the world. So I did think that was an appropriate approach. B of A is such a big animal; it was very difficult to make it turn on a dime. But I think that was the right way to do it. They also fail for complexity. They're just too complex. There's just too much that needs to happen. There's too much that we need to do in order to make these things successful. And then sometimes they're way too number specific. Sometimes they get focused on whether it's a quality award or whether it's a number of loans going through the door or whatever our operational metric is. We get too focused on the number and we forget about everything else, and other things suffer. We lose the visibility.
What I don't see there is with them. What's in it for me?
Right.
I think too often this changes doesn't focus on how do you get people to find out what's in it for them, what can they get out of this. Because frankly, if there's nothing in it for them, it's to your point about incenting.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get those things to happen.
You're absolutely right, and I will tell you this, I struggle with that. The whole idea of yes, we're all there for paycheck, but it's a little hard to see how someone can be demotivated by if I don't have something else in my incentive plan.
Well, it's not always incentive, it's more, it's getting them to think that they're part of some sort of bigger cultural change, to get them to think, you're talking about, you know, I'm not gonna do spiritual or whatever, but there are things where you say, hey, I'm part of a bigger picture, I'm part of something else, like someone was saying, that was in change management, military. They're not getting paid, they're doing it for this higher goal.
Right.
So there's always something like that, and I found when I've done some of these things, sometimes it's not I give them more pay, it's I treat them more professionally. I give them the opportunity to go do things on their own time. So there's a lot of give and take, and I think that's missing a lot in these kind of changes.
I also think it's better to have a clear mission rather than also a clear vision, because the vision is a what, but the real thing is the what, how is related to the mission. So the mission must be crisp, clear, and what you do in daily matter is tied to the mission. The vision is you're not there yet. You're trying to go,
Right.
but the mission is always there.
Right.
So clear mission must be there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's not easy stuff. And I think you see how many organizations fail in culture changes, or their attempts in culture changes. There's other ones that are successful. You know, I can probably name a few off the top of my head, but absolutely right. It's clear vision, clear mission. What's in it for me? How do we get people bought in? It's tough to get there. Next slide, please. All right, and then organizational change. You guys have all seen these. They're org charts. Again, back to my focus on this particular one, it's really, do we have the right work in the right place? Let's jump to the next one, please. All right. Anybody familiar with the value stream map? Yeah, this is a great little tool. So it's another type of process map. But really, why would we use this one versus the other one? And can we not use the first one that we talked about? Of course we can. But the great thing about the value stream map, and this is a very simple one, is it really does focus on timing. You know, the time between here and here. The reason I'm showing this here is that when we talk about putting the work in the right hands, this is a great tool for doing that. If I know that this is a 4-minute wait time and then it takes 2 minutes to process here, then it's a 6-minute wait time and then it takes 2 minutes to process here, maybe I want to focus on the 6 minutes, or maybe I want to focus on those 4 minutes, or whatever those breaks are. You need to have a good understanding of what your metrics are and how your process works and how you're measuring your process to be able to produce a document like this. But it's great for identifying how the organization, how the work flows through the organization and where the bottlenecks are. Make sense? All right. We're going to cruise right along here. Next slide, please. Tools and technology. So I talked about the process fix. I talked about people fix. Now I'm talking about the tools and technology fix. I'm going to give you one slide here, guys, on this one, because I think first of all, there are people much more qualified to talk about this than I am. But secondly, to me, like I said before, technology is really, it's the automation of a process that we've designed. I know folks will debate me on how that necessarily works, but in my mind, so I do have almost a waterfall type picture up here. I will tell you that I'm more of a waterfall guy than I am an agile guy for a couple reasons. Really more about organization and environment than anything else. But what tools and technology should do for us is it allows us to automate a process, make it work more quickly, take some of the guesswork out of our hands, make it something a little bit cleaner and hopefully a little more error-proof. All right, next slide, please. All right, and then environment. So environment fixes are tough too, right? These are more, let's be aware of these things. Internally, do we have a clear vision? I should add, do we have a clear mission, right? What does our corporate culture look like, and does the culture support our vision? Does it support our mission? What does morale look like? We just talked about a second ago, do people come in for a paycheck, or are they bought in? Do they feel like they have some kind of ownership in this process? And then we've got external environments, things like competition. You know, where do we rank and are we successful? It's no fun to lose. How's our industry doing overall? So we might be killing it with our competitors, but if the industry's in the tank, it's probably not going to be great for everybody. It's not going to be a great year. Political and tax. Are we in a business-friendly city or state? Is the country starting to lay regulation all over us? We've got to change the way that we need to do things. Socioeconomic. Can our customers afford our products? Do we have the right? Are we positioned appropriately for who we think our customers are? And then regulatory. How much time and effort is spent on regulatory projects? We'll tell you that when I was at B of A, I spent almost all of my time strictly regulatory projects. And that gets you a little down. You don't get to do a lot of the fun process stuff. You don't get to really make changes. You're really just aligning to some structure that somebody gave you. And it takes a lot of fun out of the work. Next slide, please. So what's next? Let's talk about what's next. So at this point, we knew what was wrong. We got all our fixes in place. Now what do I do? I mean, I've got an idea of what the problem is. I know how I want to fix it. What do I do? Jump to the next slide, please. All right, so now we're back to kind of what's in our wheelhouse. We know what we want to do. We put it on a plan. We plan to work. We work the plan. It's the same basic approach that you guys are all used to, but having that information and understanding up front, getting that question of what you're trying to accomplish, really understanding the meaning of your deliverables, that's what needs to go into your plan, not just the basic stuff that comes out of your template. Next slide, please. And then the very last part, did I get what I asked for? Remember we talked about in the beginning, did I get what I asked for? Did we solve the problem? Do we know how to measure it? We're right back to where we are with the KPIs. Now we remeasure, now we take a look at old versus new. Did we do the right things? Did we solve the problem? Is there more? Is there continuous improvement that we need to kick off? That's where that happens. Unfortunately, we don't do a lot of that, do we? I know that in my experience, we don't get an awful lot of time to go back and say, did we do the right things? A little bit frustrating on my end, but hopefully as cultures evolve and we start influencing, we're going to get more into this mindset. Okay, next slide, please. All right, last thought. Apologize for rushing a little bit in the end there. So I love this quote, and I'm not real familiar with it. It's fairly new to me. But if I had an hour to solve a problem, my life depended on it, I would use 55 minutes to determining the proper questions to ask. That's exactly what we're talking about here, guys, is make sure we're clear, make sure we know the questions that we're actually asking. Let's understand the meaning behind those questions. Let's make sure that we're not giving an inappropriate answer to, how are you today? Well, you know, my cat's sick, and, you know, I got a flat tire, and everything else in the whole world. Let's make sure we get it. Let's do our job to be instruments of change and make sure that other folks out there understand that there's more to process methodology than templates and tools. It's thought. All right, well, thank you, guys. Are there any questions? We do have 4 minutes.
I think that the culture of the company you're working in drives a lot about, how you approach processes and problem solving.
Absolutely right. You're 100% right. As a matter of fact, I didn't realize how right you were until I started working in the current organization where I am. Like I said, there's not a lot of change until recently. Not a lot of change and not a lot of influence from other organizations. So they've done things the way they've done things for years. And to come in with new ideas and try to influence them in another direction, it really is a lot of work. I say to everybody that I interview that you're in a position where you're going to have to do a whole bunch of work for a bunch of people that don't really understand what you're doing. So you're going to have to teach and train as you perform. And you also have to come from a position of humility. You can't walk in there and say, well, you don't know what I'm doing, so you just sit there and watch and I'll take care of this. So you're absolutely right. Culture is a huge, huge component to how you address your problems. Absolutely.
So I keep liking that. You keep going back to saying humility, humble, respect. I think that's checking you out the door. I think that's the only way you succeed as a consultant. Because if you go in there like you did at first, say, hey, I've got all the answers, why don't you get it? You will definitely fail. So when you guys step back, so wait a minute. It's kind of give them what they want and how they can understand it. And then all of a sudden then they say, you've given them respect as the process experts. Because even though they've been doing it all along, and they are the experts.
Right.
So it's kind of that's the right approach.
Yeah, it's challenging at times too to be able to, and like we said, ego at the door. This is how I think you need to do it. They might want to tweak it. They might want to change it. There's 100 ways to be right. You can't get hung up on, no, I am right. I don't think you would have heard that out of my mouth 10 years ago.
Age.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for your time and attention.